Have you ever heard a story so unique, so deeply moving, that it stays with you long after it ends? Today, I will share with you a tale that is as mysterious as it is inspiring. A story of beauty so dangerous it could kill, and a love so pure it could save. It's the kind of story that reminds us of the transformative power of empathy, the resilience of the human spirit, and the undeniable truth that love, when genuine, can conquer even the darkest of curses. This narrative isn't just about the struggles of a girl named Isabella. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's capacity for compassion and understanding. So if you believe in the power of love and the importance of kindness, I encourage you to join our community by subscribing to this channel. And while you're here, share your own inspiring affirmation in the comments below. Perhaps something like, "I open my heart to love and understanding." Let's fill this space with positivity as we journey together through this extraordinary tale. Now, let us step into the first chapter of this story, an account of beauty so lethal it reshaped the life of an innocent girl and everyone around her. Isabella came into the world under unusual circumstances. Born during a violent storm that rattled the small, secluded village of Serenity Hollow, her cries pierced the thunder as the midwife held her for the first time, her eyes widening in shock. The child was breathtakingly beautiful, her face so radiant it seemed otherworldly. But beauty, as the villagers would soon learn, can be a curse. Her parents, humble farmers named Thomas and Eliza, knew something was amiss when even their closest friends avoided looking directly at the child. Whispers began to circulate, fear spreading like wildfire. One by one, those who glimpsed Isabella's face experienced an inexplicable and sudden death, their hearts stopping as if overwhelmed by an unseen force. At first, the villagers blamed witchcraft. No beauty should hold such power, they muttered, and some even called for her banishment. But Thomas and Eliza loved their daughter deeply and refused to abandon her. They built a life of quiet isolation, shielding Isabella from the world with veils and curtains, always keeping her face hidden. They moved to the edge of the village, a place shrouded by thick woods, where they could raise her safely away from the accusing stares of their neighbors. Isabella's childhood was lonely, but she grew up surrounded by love. Her parents were her protectors, her guides, and her only companions. Eliza taught her to read and write, instilling in her a love for literature. Thomas shared his knowledge of the natural world, showing her how to tend to the garden and care for animals. Together, they created a cocoon of warmth and safety. Though Isabella could not ignore the world beyond her walls, a world she longed to be part of. As she grew older, her intelligence became evident. Isabella devoured books, mastering topics ranging from physics to philosophy. She built intricate machines from scraps her father brought home, and her poetry moved her mother to tears. Yet, despite her brilliance, the weight of her isolation bore heavily on her. She dreamed of walking through the village square, of hearing laughter that wasn't muffled by distance, and of feeling the warmth of friendship. But these dreams were tempered by the grim reality of her curse. The tragedy of Isabella's beauty lay not only in its danger, but also in its irony. The very trait that could connect her to others, the universal allure of beauty, was what kept her isolated. "Why me?" she often asked her mother during quiet evenings by the fire. "Why was I made this way?" Her mother would only stroke her hair and whisper, "Because the world wasn't ready for someone like you." Serenity Hollow, despite its peaceful name, was not a place of understanding. The villagers spoke of Isabella in hushed tones, calling her the cursed girl or the living Medusa. Children dared each other to peek through her window, though none dared to linger long enough to face her gaze. Her life became a cautionary tale, a dark fable used to scare misbehaving children. Yet, Isabella never resented her beauty, though it brought her pain. Instead, she learned to live with her burden, finding solace in the beauty of the world around her, the way the sun filtered through the trees, the melody of birdsong at dawn, the soft rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. She became an observer of life, her sharp mind absorbing every detail, even as she was denied the chance to fully participate. But the isolation could not last forever. News of her existence reached beyond the village, and soon, curious strangers began to arrive. Drawn by tales of the beautiful girl whose face could kill, they came with cameras, notebooks, and probing questions, seeking proof of the fantastical. Thomas and Eliza turned them all away, but the visits left a lasting impact on Isabella. She realized that her life, confined as it was, could no longer remain hidden. She was 18 when she first voiced her desire to leave Serenity Hollow. "I want to see the world," she told her parents one evening, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "I want to learn, to grow, to live." Her parents exchanged worried glances. They knew the risks but also understood her longing. After days of debate, they agreed to let her pursue an education in the city. Under one condition: she must never remove her veil. And so, Isabella prepared to step beyond the boundaries of her small world. Armed with her intellect, her resilience, and a thin veil that would shield her and others from the deadly power of her beauty. The villagers watched her leave in silence, their curiosity tinged with fear. As she walked down the cobblestone path, her head held high, they whispered among themselves, wondering what fate awaited the cursed girl beyond their borders. Her journey had begun, but little did Isabella know that her greatest challenges and her greatest triumphs were yet to come. As Isabella ventures into the unknown, will her intellect and resilience be enough to navigate a world that fears her? And can she ever find a way to break the curse that binds her? Stay with us as we explore the next chapter in this extraordinary tale. The city was nothing like Serenity Hollow. Its towering buildings stretched toward the sky, casting long shadows over bustling streets filled with the hum of life. For Isabella, who had spent her entire existence surrounded by silence and solitude, the cacophony was overwhelming and exhilarating. She arrived at her modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, her veil firmly in place, and stood at the window for hours, watching the ebb and flow of humanity below. This was the world she had longed to be part of, a world full of possibilities, and yet one that felt just as unreachable as it had in her quiet village. Enrolling in West Haven University, a prestigious institution known for its rigorous academics, was her first step into this unfamiliar realm. Isabella's exceptional aptitude quickly set her apart. Professors marveled at her insights, often commenting that she seemed far older and wiser than her years. Her peers, however, were less welcoming. To them, she was an enigma, always shrouded in her veil, her face a mystery that sparked endless speculation. "Who is she hiding from?" they whispered. "What's wrong with her?" These murmurs followed Isabella everywhere, a constant reminder that her curse extended beyond her appearance. Despite the gossip, Isabella poured herself into her studies. She excelled in every subject, from advanced mathematics to classical literature. Her intelligence was her armor, a shield against the loneliness that gnawed at her. But even the sharpest mind cannot fully protect the heart. Isabella yearned for connection, for a friend who could see past her veil and understand her soul. She watched her classmates laugh together in the courtyard, their camaraderie a painful contrast to her isolation. She envied the way they shared their lives so freely, a luxury she could never afford. Her isolation wasn't merely emotional, it was practical. The university required her to live in private quarters, away from the communal dormitories. The administration, aware of her unique condition, had agreed to her enrollment under strict guidelines to ensure the safety of others. She was escorted to and from classes by staff, her presence always announced in advance to prevent accidental encounters. These precautions only deepened the divide between Isabella and her peers, reinforcing the idea that she was different, dangerous, other. One evening, as she studied in the quiet sanctuary of the university library, she noticed a book left open on a nearby table. Its pages were filled with intricate illustrations of ancient myths. She recognized the story immediately: Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Isabella felt an ache in her chest as she read the familiar tale. How often had she been compared to that mythical monster? Yet, unlike Medusa, she had no power to petrify, no malice in her heart. Her beauty was a curse thrust upon her, unasked for and unearned. Still, there were moments of light amidst the darkness. One of her professors, Dr. Evelyn Carter, took a special interest in her. a sharp-eyed woman with a kind heart. Dr. Carter saw in Isabella not a cursed girl, but a gifted young woman with immense potential. She encouraged Isabella to pursue her dreams of becoming a scientist, often staying late after lectures to discuss theories and research. Their conversations were a balm to Isabella's soul, a rare connection that gave her hope. But hope is fragile, and the loneliness persisted. Isabella's intelligence and determination couldn't fill the void left by the absence of true companionship. She began to question whether her decision to leave Serenity Hollow had been a mistake. Was it worth enduring this constant scrutiny, this relentless isolation, just to chase a dream that seemed ever out of reach? The turning point came during an autumn afternoon when the university hosted its annual cultural festival. The campus was alive with color and music, students and faculty mingling freely as they celebrated the diversity of their community. Isabella watched from the shadows, her heart aching with longing. She wanted so desperately to join them, to feel the warmth of human connection, even if just for a moment. It was then that she noticed him, a boy standing apart from the crowd, sketching the scene with quiet focus. His name, she would later learn, was Nicholas. Unlike the others, he seemed unperturbed by her presence. Their eyes met briefly, her gaze hidden behind the veil, and in that fleeting moment, something shifted. It wasn't love at first sight, nor was it pity. It was curiosity, a spark of interest unclouded by fear or judgment. Nicholas would become a pivotal figure in Isabella's life, though neither of them knew it yet. For now, he was simply a stranger who had looked her way without flinching, without whispering, without turning away. That small act of acknowledgement stayed with her, a beacon of light in the murky waters of her solitude. As the festival wound down, Isabella returned to her apartment, her mind racing. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, not the kind born of academic achievement or personal resilience, but the kind that comes from the possibility of connection. It was a fragile hope, tenuous and uncertain, but it was enough to keep her going. The days that followed were a mix of progress and setbacks. Isabella continued to excel academically, earning accolades that should have brought her pride, but instead felt hollow. Her interactions with Nicholas were fleeting, limited to brief encounters in the library or passing glances during lectures. He seemed kind, patient, and unassuming, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the world around them. Still, Isabella hesitated to reach out. The fear of rejection loomed large, a shadow that tainted every potential friendship. What if he, too, turned away once he learned the truth about her? What if her curse claimed another victim? These questions kept her silent, her heart a fortress she dared not open. Yet, the seeds of change had been planted, and they would soon begin to grow. Nicholas, with his quiet curiosity and steady presence, was unknowingly chipping away at the walls Isabella had built around herself. He saw something in her that others didn't, a depth, a strength, a story worth knowing. And though Isabella couldn't yet see it, she was beginning to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her life could hold more than loneliness and longing. As the semester progressed, Isabella found herself at a crossroads. The safety of isolation clashed with the yearning for connection, each tugging at her with equal force. She didn't know it yet, but the choices she made in the coming weeks would set the stage for a series of events that would change her life forever. The question lingered: could she truly let someone in, knowing the risks? And if she did, could they ever see beyond the curse to the person beneath? As Isabella wrestles with these questions, a new challenge looms on the horizon, one that will test her courage, her resilience, and the fragile hope she has only just begun to nurture. Stay with us as the story unfolds and discover how a moment of connection can alter the course of a life. The first morning of the new semester brought with it an electric mix of excitement and trepidation. West Haven University buzzed with activity as students shuffled between lectures, cafes, and study halls. The air carried the scent of fresh books, brewed coffee, and the faint tang of late summer air. For Isabella, stepping onto the sprawling campus was like stepping into another world, vast, teeming, and alive with possibilities. Yet even here, amidst the throng of students, she remained cloaked in her veil and shrouded in solitude. Navigating the crowded pathways wasn't easy. Whispers followed her like shadows. Is she hiding a scar? Some speculated. Or is it something worse? The veil that covered Isabella's face was an anomaly in this sea of bare expressions. Despite her intelligence and the accolades she quickly began to earn, her enigmatic appearance made her a subject of endless intrigue. Determined to prove herself, Isabella threw herself into her studies. Her days were a whirlwind of lectures, research, and solitary hours spent in the library. Professors lauded her insights, and her academic achievements began to eclipse even the most accomplished students. But as her brilliance shone brighter, so too did the curiosity and, at times, the cruelty of her peers. The first weeks passed without incident until Isabella caught the attention of Emily, the queen bee of West Haven's social scene. Emily, with her perfect smile and cutting wit, thrived on dominance and adored being the center of attention. The mystery surrounding Isabella was a threat to that dominance. She began to make her interests known, first with probing questions disguised as friendly overtures, then with passive-aggressive remarks in crowded hallways. "You know," Emily said loudly one afternoon as Isabella walked past, "some secrets are better left hidden. But the bigger the secret, the harder it is to keep." The remark drew laughter from Emily's circle, but Isabella kept walking, her head held high. Years of isolation had taught her to ignore such barbs, but beneath her stoic exterior, they left a mark. It wasn't just Emily's taunts that stung. It was the loneliness that came with being an enigma, a puzzle no one dared to solve. One evening, as Isabella sat in the library poring over a dense text on theoretical physics, a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she saw Nicholas, the boy from the cultural festival. He stood there awkwardly, clutching a sketchbook. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Isabella hesitated, her instinct to retreat warring with a flicker of curiosity. Finally, she nodded. Nicholas slid into the chair opposite her, setting his sketchbook on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as though sensing her discomfort, Nicholas broke the silence. "You're always here," he said. "I figured it was time to say hello." His words were simple, unassuming, but they carried a warmth that disarmed Isabella. She offered a small tentative smile beneath her veil. "Hello," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. Over the next few weeks, Nicholas became a quiet but persistent presence in Isabella's life. He didn't push for answers about her veil or her solitude. Instead, he seemed content to simply be near her. They began to share long hours in the library, their conversations meandering from art to science to the intricacies of human nature. Nicholas was an artist, his sketches capturing moments and emotions with a precision that fascinated Isabella. "You see the world differently," she told him one day. "You make the ordinary extraordinary." Nicholas chuckled, brushing off the compliment with a shrug. "And you," he replied, "see the extraordinary as ordinary. That's rare." For the first time in years, Isabella felt a connection forming, fragile but real. Yet, even as she opened herself to this budding friendship, the weight of her curse loomed large. She couldn't escape the fear that one wrong move could shatter the delicate balance they had created. Emily, meanwhile, was watching. The growing rapport between Isabella and Nicholas didn't go unnoticed, and her jealousy simmered beneath the surface. For Emily, it wasn't just about curiosity anymore, it was about control. She began to orchestrate subtle, calculated acts of humiliation, hoping to draw Isabella out of her shell and into a confrontation. The breaking point came during a campus-wide Halloween party. Emily, dressed as a glittering Cleopatra, cornered Isabella in the dimly lit atrium, her entourage watching eagerly from the sidelines. "Come on, Isabella," Emily said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "It's a costume party. Why don't you take off that veil and show us your real face? Unless, of course, you're scared of what we'll see." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Isabella. Her heart raced as she weighed her options. She could walk away, as she always did, or she could stand her ground. Before she could decide, Nicholas appeared at her side, his expression calm but resolute. "Leave her alone, Emily," he said firmly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Emily's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Oh, Nicholas," she purred. "Always the hero. But don't you think we deserve to know who we're dealing with?" She reached for Isabella's veil, her fingers brushing the fabric. Time seemed to slow as Isabella stepped back, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Don't," she warned. "You don't know what you're asking for." Emily froze, her confidence wavering in the face of Isabella's resolve. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a dismissive laugh, Emily stepped away. "Fine," she said, tossing her hair. "Keep your secrets, but remember, curiosity always finds a way." The incident left Isabella shaken but determined. She realized that her life at Westhaven would always be a balancing act between connection and caution, vulnerability and self-preservation. Nicholas, however, became her anchor, his quiet support a reminder that not everyone saw her as a mystery to be unraveled. But even anchors can slip, and as the semester wore on, the fragile peace Isabella had found began to crack. The shadows of her past were never far behind, and the choices she made in the coming days would determine whether she could truly escape them, or whether she would remain trapped by the curse that had defined her life for so long. What happens when trust is betrayed, and the very connections we cherish become our greatest vulnerabilities? The answer lies just ahead, as Isabella's journey takes a dark and unexpected turn. The cold bite of winter began to creep into the air, blanketing Westhaven University in a soft frost that clung to its ivy-covered walls. Students bundled in scarves and coats hurried through the paths, their laughter visible in the crisp morning light. But for Isabella, the season brought no comfort. The growing tension between her and Emily had become an unspoken undercurrent, a quiet storm waiting to break. Emily had grown bolder since the Halloween confrontation, her tactics more devious and her provocations more pointed. She didn't just spread rumors anymore. She orchestrated moments designed to isolate Isabella further. If Isabella walked into a room, Emily's laughter would follow, a sharp dagger meant to slice through her composure. The whispers, once distant, now felt closer, louder, and impossible to ignore. Nicholas, ever the steady presence, noticed the change. "She's pushing you," he said one evening as they sat together in the library. "You don't have to let her." Isabella hesitated, her hands clutching the edges of her book. "I know," she replied softly, her voice carrying the weight of years spent walking away. "But standing up to her could cost more than I'm willing to risk." The risk Isabella feared was not just Emily's wrath, but the devastating consequences of her own curse. Her veiled face, her unspoken truth, was a constant reminder of the danger she posed. No matter how deeply she trusted Nicholas or how fiercely he defended her, there was a barrier between them that she dared not breach. Emily, however, was relentless. She was no longer content with subtle barbs and whispered innuendos. Her curiosity about Isabella's veil had turned into an obsession, and she began crafting a plan to unveil the truth once and for all. It started with seemingly innocent gestures, an invitation to join a study group, a compliment on Isabella's academic achievements, but these acts were laced with ulterior motives. Emily wanted to gain Isabella's trust just enough to lure her into a vulnerable position. The moment came during a charity event organized by the university. It was a gala evening, filled with glittering lights and elegant music. Students milled about in formal attire, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Isabella had reluctantly agreed to attend, coaxed by Nicholas, who believed it might be good for her to engage with her peers on neutral ground. Emily seized the opportunity. Draped in a sequined gown that sparkled under the chandeliers, she approached Isabella with a radiant smile that masked her true intentions. "You look lovely tonight," Emily said, her tone dripping with feigned warmth. "I was hoping we could finally put the past behind us. No more rumors, no more tension, just a fresh start." Isabella regarded her cautiously, unsure whether to believe the olive branch was genuine. Nicholas, standing nearby, gave her a reassuring nod, and she allowed herself a small smile. "A fresh start sounds nice," she replied, her voice hesitant but sincere. Emily's plan unfurled seamlessly. She suggested they all join a group of students on the terrace for a casual conversation. steering the topic toward light-hearted subjects that slowly evolved into dares. Laughter echoed across the terrace as one student was challenged to sing a verse of an embarrassing song, another to confess their most awkward childhood memory. The camaraderie felt almost real, and for a brief moment, Isabella allowed herself to relax. Then Emily made her move. "Isabella," she said, her voice as sweet as honey but sharp as a knife. "Since we're all opening up tonight, how about you join in? Take off your veil just for a moment. Show us the real you." The group fell silent, their laughter fading into an uneasy hush. All eyes turned to Isabella, the weight of their curiosity pressing down on her. Her heart raced, panic swelling in her chest as she clutched the edges of her veil. "I can't," she said, her voice barely audible. Emily's smile twisted into something cruel. "Can't or won't? Come on, Isabella, what's the harm? We're all friends here, aren't we?" Her tone was laced with mockery, her true intent clear. Nicholas stepped forward, his expression dark with anger. "Enough, Emily," he said firmly. "You're crossing a line." Emily's eyes flashed with defiance. "Why are you always protecting her, Nicholas? What are you so afraid of? If she's not hiding anything, then why the secrecy?" The tension on the terrace was palpable, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Isabella's breath came in shallow gasps as she struggled to find the courage to speak. She wanted to defend herself, to explain the curse that had defined her life, but the words refused to come. Finally, she turned and fled, her footsteps echoing down the stone staircase as she disappeared into the night. Nicholas followed, his voice calling after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't face him, not now. Not after the humiliation Emily had orchestrated. Back in the solitude of her apartment, Isabella collapsed onto her bed, tears streaming down her face. The loneliness she had fought so hard to overcome felt more suffocating than ever. She had dared to hope for connection, and now that hope felt shattered beyond repair. But even in her despair, a spark of defiance began to flicker within her. Emily's cruelty had exposed the fragility of her situation, but it had also revealed something else: the limits of fear. For years, Isabella had allowed her curse to dictate her life, to keep her hidden and isolated. Perhaps it was time to stop running. As dawn broke over the city, Isabella sat by her window, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce the horizon. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: she couldn't continue living as a prisoner of her own beauty. Somewhere, somehow, she would find a way to break free. Little did she know, the path to freedom would lead her into an even darker storm, one that would test not only her courage, but also the strength of her heart. The days following the gala were a blur of whispers and avoidance. Isabella moved through the campus like a ghost, her veil a fortress against the prying eyes of her peers. The humiliation Emily had orchestrated left her more isolated than ever, but it was the growing distance between her and Nicholas that truly gnawed at her heart. He had tried to reach out through notes slipped under her door, through quiet gestures of support, but Isabella couldn't bring herself to face him. The fear of explaining the truth and the possibility of losing the one person she had come to rely on was paralyzing. But Nicholas, persistent as always, refused to be shut out. One evening, as Isabella sat alone in the dimly lit library, he appeared beside her. "You can't keep running from everyone," he said gently, his voice tinged with a quiet determination. She glanced at him, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the open book before her. "I'm not running," she murmured, though the words felt hollow even to her. Nicholas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Then let me help," he said simply. For a moment, Isabella considered letting him in. There was a warmth in Nicholas's eyes, a sincerity that made her believe, if only for a fleeting instant, that he might understand. But the weight of her secret loomed too large. "You can't help me," she said, her voice breaking. "No one can." Unbeknownst to Isabella, her refusal to open up had left Nicholas vulnerable to the very forces she feared most. Emily, still determined to unravel the mystery of Isabella's veil, had turned her sights on him. She approached him with the charm and cunning that had made her so formidable, weaving a narrative of concern. "Don't you want to know why she keeps pushing you away?" she asked, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "Maybe she doesn't trust you. Maybe she's hiding something that could hurt you. Nicholas, conflicted but curious, hesitated. Emily seized the moment, planting the seeds of doubt with careful precision. "If you really care about her," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "don't you think you deserve the truth?" It was a dangerous game, and Emily played it masterfully. Over the next week, she fed Nicholas subtle hints and half-truths, manipulating his concern for Isabella into a weapon. She painted herself as an ally, someone who only wanted to help him break through the walls Isabella had built. Slowly, Nicholas began to waver. His loyalty to Isabella remained steadfast, but the unanswered questions gnawed at him, eroding the trust they had painstakingly built. The breaking point came on a quiet evening when Emily cornered Nicholas in the art studio where he often sketched. "I know how to get answers," she said, her voice low and urgent, "but I need your help." Nicholas frowned, his instincts warning him to tread carefully. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Emily leaned in closer, her expression earnest. "If she won't tell you the truth, maybe it's time to find out for yourself." At first, Nicholas resisted. The thought of betraying Isabella's trust felt unthinkable, but Emily's persistence wore him down. She framed her plan as an act of kindness, a way to free Isabella from whatever burden she was carrying. "Sometimes people don't know how to ask for help," she said. "You might be the only one who can save her." The following evening, Emily orchestrated her plan with meticulous precision. She convinced Nicholas to invite Isabella to a secluded spot on campus, a quiet garden surrounded by towering hedges where they could talk without interruption. Isabella, hesitant but touched by the invitation, agreed. She arrived at the garden as twilight cast a golden glow over the campus, her veil fluttering gently in the evening breeze. Nicholas was waiting for her, his sketchbook in hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice warm but tinged with an undertone of unease. They sat together on a stone bench, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. For a while, they talked about trivial things, classes, books, the changing seasons. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Finally, Nicholas set his sketchbook aside and turned to face her. "Isabella," he began, his voice steady but quiet, "I need to ask you something." She froze, her heart pounding as she braced herself for what was coming. "Why won't you let me see your face?" he asked, the words falling between them like a weight. Her breath caught in her throat. She had prepared for this question 100 times in her mind, but now that it had come, the words she had rehearsed eluded her. "It's not that simple," she whispered. Nicholas reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Then make me understand," he said. "I want to help you, Isabella, but I can't do that if you keep shutting me out." For a moment, she considered telling him everything. The curse, the lives it had claimed, the fear that consumed her every waking moment. But the thought of his reaction, of the possibility that he might not believe her, kept her silent. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said finally, her voice trembling. And then it happened. In a swift, impulsive motion, Nicholas reached for her veil. "Let me see," he said, his tone more urgent than she had ever heard it. Isabella's hand shot up to stop him, but she was too late. The veil fell away, and for the first time, Nicholas saw her face. The world seemed to hold its breath as their eyes met. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Isabella thought he might be different, that he might somehow be immune to the curse. But then his expression shifted. His body went rigid, his eyes wide with shock and fear. And then he collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the ground shattered the silence, a cruel echo that reverberated through Isabella's mind. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to rouse him. But it was no use. Nicholas was gone, his life snuffed out by the very beauty that had isolated her for so long. A choked sob escaped her lips as she pulled the veil back over her face, her heart breaking under the weight of guilt and grief. She had trusted him, and he had betrayed her. But it wasn't anger that consumed her, it was sorrow, an all-encompassing ache that left her feeling hollow and numb. As she sat there, cradling Nicholas's lifeless form, a new realization dawned upon her. The curse was not just a burden, it was a weapon. And if she was to survive in a world that saw her as a threat, She would have to find a way to wield it, not in vengeance, but in self-preservation. In the distance, Emily watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She had set the events into motion, but even she hadn't anticipated the devastating consequences. As she slipped away into the night, a single thought echoed in her mind. The game she had started was far from over. And for Isabella, the storm was only beginning. The betrayal had broken something inside her, and the path ahead was darker than she could have ever imagined. The days after Nicholas's death were a blur for Isabella, a haze of grief, guilt, and a simmering fury she couldn't quite contain. His absence was a void she couldn't ignore, and the whispers that followed her across campus became unbearable. It wasn't just her peers anymore, professors, staff, even the custodians looked at her differently, their eyes filled with unease and suspicion. It was as though they all knew something terrible had happened, even if they didn't know exactly what. Emily, meanwhile, played her role to perfection. She wept in public, lamenting the tragedy of Nicholas's sudden death, painting herself as a grieving friend who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She avoided Isabella altogether, but her influence lingered in the shadows, fueling the rumors that spread like wildfire. "I heard she was with him when it happened," someone whispered in a lecture hall. "Maybe she cursed him," another said in the cafeteria. Isabella's anger burned beneath the surface, but it was the grief that cut the deepest. She replayed that fateful moment in the garden over and over in her mind. The way Nicholas had reached for her veil, the look in his eyes just before the curse claimed him. She blamed herself for trusting him, for letting him get close enough to hurt her. But more than that, she blamed the curse itself, a cruel twist of fate that had turned her beauty into a weapon. As the weeks passed, Isabella withdrew further into herself. She stopped attending classes, stopped venturing out of her apartment altogether. The walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, closing in on her with each passing day. But isolation was a double-edged sword. While it protected her from the judgment of others, it also left her alone with her thoughts, and those thoughts grew darker with each hour. One evening, as she sat in the dim light of her small living room, staring blankly at the pages of an unopened book, a knock at the door startled her. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. No one visited her anymore. The campus had all but turned its back on her, and she preferred it that way. But the knocking persisted, soft but insistent. Cautiously, she approached the door, pulling her veil tightly around her face. "Who is it?" she called, her voice shaky. There was a pause, and then a familiar voice replied, "Dr. Carter, may I come in?" Relief and apprehension washed over her in equal measure. Dr. Carter had always been kind to her, one of the few people who had treated her with genuine respect. But even so, Isabella hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Please, Isabella," Dr. Carter replied. "I just want to talk. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just let me in." After a long moment, Isabella unlocked the door and stepped back to allow her in. Dr. Carter entered slowly, her expression calm but concerned. She carried a small thermos and 2 cups, setting them on the table without a word. The room was silent as she poured tea and handed a cup to Isabella, who accepted it with trembling hands. "I'm not here to judge you," Dr. Carter said softly, sitting across from her. "But I can see that you're struggling, and I want you to know that you don't have to face this alone." Isabella stared at the steaming cup in her hands, her vision blurred by unshed tears. "I don't think anyone can help me," she whispered. Dr. Carter leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I know about the rumors, Isabella. I know how cruel people can be. But I also know you're not a monster. You've spent your entire life hiding, not because you wanted to hurt anyone, but because you wanted to protect them. That's not the mark of a monster. That's the mark of someone who cares deeply." The words hit Isabella like a wave, breaking through the walls she had built around herself. For the first time since Nicholas's death, she allowed herself to cry, her sobs shaking her entire body. Dr. Carter didn't try to stop her. She simply sat there, offering quiet reassurance as Isabella let out the pain she had been holding inside. When the tears finally subsided, Isabella wiped her eyes and looked at Dr. Carter. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Every time I try to be part of the world, I end up hurting someone. Maybe it's better if I just disappear." Dr. Carter shook her head. "Disappearing won't solve anything," she said. "The world needs people like you, Isabella, people who are strong enough to face their fears and show others that it's possible to overcome them. You have a gift, even if it feels like a curse right now, and I believe you can find a way to use that gift for good." The conversation stayed with Isabella long after Dr. Carter left. It planted a seed of resolve, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to break free from the chains of fear and guilt that had bound her for so long. The first step was returning to campus. It wasn't easy. The stares and whispers followed her everywhere, and the weight of Nicholas's absence was a constant reminder of her mistakes. But Isabella forced herself to endure it, knowing that hiding would only make things worse. She started attending lectures again, answering questions with the same sharp insight that had once earned her the admiration of her professors. Her resilience began to shift the narrative. While some students still whispered behind her back, others started to see her in a new light, not as a monster, but as someone who had endured unimaginable hardship and emerged stronger. Even Emily's influence began to wane, her cruelty losing its power as more people rallied around Isabella. But Isabella knew that reclaiming her place in the world wasn't enough. She needed to confront the curse head-on, to understand its origins, and if possible, find a way to break it. She buried herself in research, poring over ancient texts and obscure legends in search of answers. It was during one of these late-night study sessions that she stumbled across a passage in an old book of folklore. The tale spoke of a woman cursed by the gods, her beauty so divine that it drove mortals mad. The curse, the story said, could only be broken by an act of true, selfless love that was strong enough to see past appearances and embrace the soul beneath. The words resonated with Isabella, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know if the curse on her was the same as the one in the story, but she was determined to find out. For the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for the possibility of a future where her beauty would no longer be a weapon, but a source of strength and inspiration. As Isabella delved deeper into her quest for answers, she began to see the world differently. The pain and fear that had once defined her life were still there, but they no longer consumed her. She was no longer running from her curse. She was facing it head-on, determined to break free and reclaim her destiny. But the path ahead was fraught with challenges, and Isabella knew that the most difficult battles were still to come. Somewhere deep in her heart, she sensed that the answers she sought would force her to confront not just her curse, but the very foundations of who she was and who she wanted to become. Isabella's resolve to confront her curse set her on a path fraught with uncertainty, yet she moved forward with a quiet determination that felt foreign and exhilarating. Her days were filled with study and introspection, her nights consumed by endless hours of research into ancient myths and curses. She became a fixture in the university library, her presence a silent challenge to those who had once whispered about her. The veil, still ever present, no longer felt like a shield but a banner of resilience. It was during one such late-night session that Isabella met Nicholas's younger brother, Alexander. She hadn't known Nicholas had a sibling. His quiet nature had left much of his personal life a mystery to her. But as Alexander introduced himself, the resemblance was undeniable. He shared Nicholas's warm eyes and easy smile, though there was a sharpness to his demeanor that hinted at a different kind of strength. "I wanted to meet you," he said simply, his voice steady but tinged with an undercurrent of emotion. Isabella froze, unsure of how to respond. The guilt she carried over Nicholas's death flared in her chest, and she braced herself for anger, for accusations. But none came. Instead, Alexander sat across from her, his gaze unwavering. "I know you were with him that night," he continued. "And I know something happened, something you're not telling anyone. I don't care about the rumors. I just want the truth." For a long moment, Isabella said nothing. The weight of her secret pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. But as she looked into Alexander's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected: understanding. He wasn't here to condemn her. He was here to listen. And for the first time since Nicholas's death, Isabella allowed herself to speak. She told him everything: the curse, the lives it had claimed, the isolation it had forced upon her. Her voice trembled as she recounted the night in the garden, the moment Nicholas had reached for her veil, and the devastating aftermath. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her face, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." Alexander listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. "That's a lot to take in," he admitted. "But I believe you." The words hit Isabella like a lifeline, pulling her back from the brink of despair. "You do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He nodded. "Nicholas always said you were different, special. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but now I think I do." He paused, his gaze softening. "You've been through more than anyone should have to bear, but you're still here. That says something." In the days that followed, Alexander became a constant presence in Isabella's life. Unlike Nicholas, whose quiet curiosity had drawn him to her, Alexander's approach was more deliberate. He asked questions, challenged her assumptions, and pushed her to confront the parts of herself she had long buried. At first, Isabella resisted, wary of letting someone get too close again. But Alexander's persistence and unwavering support began to break through her walls. Their conversations often turned to the curse, its origins, and the possibility of breaking it. Alexander, a history major with a keen interest in mythology, dove into the research alongside her. Together, they pieced together fragments of ancient stories and obscure rituals, searching for clues that might lead to a solution. It was during one such session that Alexander stumbled across a passage that caught his attention. "This," he said, sliding the book across the table to Isabella. "Look at this." The passage described a ritual of cleansing, a rite performed under the light of a blood moon to purge a soul of its burden. The details were vague, the language cryptic, but it was the first concrete lead they had found. Isabella read the passage carefully, her heart pounding. "Do you think it could work?" she asked. Alexander shrugged. "It's worth a try. The next blood moon is in 2 weeks. We can prepare until then." The days leading up to the ritual were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Isabella's fear of failure was tempered by a growing sense of hope, a fragile but persistent belief that she might finally be free. Alexander was her anchor, his steady presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. On the night of the blood moon, they ventured to an ancient grove just outside the city, a place steeped in history and mystery. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, the trees casting long shadows in the crimson light of the moon. Isabella stood at the center of the grove, her veil fluttering in the breeze, as Alexander arranged the components of the ritual. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. Isabella nodded, her hands trembling at her sides. "I think so." The ritual began with a series of incantations, the words unfamiliar and ancient, their meaning lost to time. Isabella closed her eyes, focusing on the energy around her, the hum of the grove, the warmth of the moonlight on her skin. As the ritual progressed, a strange sensation began to wash over her, a mix of fear and exhilaration, as though something deep within her was shifting. But as the final incantation was spoken, nothing happened. The grove remained silent, the air still. Isabella's heart sank, the fragile hope she had nurtured shattering into 1,000 pieces. "It didn't work," she whispered, her voice breaking. Alexander stepped forward, his expression determined. "We're not giving up," he said. "This is just the beginning. We'll find another way." As the blood moon faded and the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Isabella stood in the grove, her heart heavy but resolute. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore, and with Alexander by her side, she would continue to fight for herself, for those she had lost, and for the love that defied the curse that had shaped her life. In the distance, the city stirred to life, its streets bathed in golden light. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a glimmer of peace. The journey was far from over, But she was no longer afraid. She had faced her fate, and she was ready to rewrite her story. In the weeks following the ritual's failure, Isabella and Alexander grew even closer. The shared weight of their mission bound them in a way neither could have anticipated. While their research into the curse continued, Isabella began to notice a shift in herself. The raw despair she had carried for so long was softening, replaced by something unfamiliar: determination. The curse was still there, an ever-present shadow, but for the first time, Isabella felt as though it didn't completely define her. She had spent her life hiding, but now, a part of her was ready to step into the light. West Haven University had planned its annual graduation ceremony, a grand affair held in the main hall, its vaulted ceilings adorned with banners and chandeliers. For Isabella, the ceremony was supposed to be a quiet milestone, something she would attend with her veil in place before retreating once again into obscurity. But as the day approached, the idea of continuing to live in secrecy weighed heavily on her. She was tired of being invisible. "I want to reveal myself," she told Alexander one evening as they pored over yet another obscure text in the library. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table. Alexander looked up sharply, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone cautious but supportive. Isabella nodded. "I've spent my whole life hiding. I need to stop. People deserve to know the truth about the curse, about what I've been through, and I deserve to live without fear." The decision wasn't made lightly. Isabella knew the risks. She knew that revealing her face could lead to chaos, even death. But she also knew that living in fear wasn't truly living. Alexander, though hesitant, supported her wholeheartedly. "If this is what you want, I'll be right there with you," he promised. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the main hall was filled with students, faculty, and families, all buzzing with excitement. Isabella stood in the shadows, her veil in place, her heart pounding as she rehearsed the speech she had prepared. She had been invited to speak as one of the top graduates, a rare honor that felt almost ironic given her struggles to connect with her peers. As the ceremony unfolded, Isabella felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. But as Alexander caught her eye from the audience, his reassuring nod gave her the strength to move forward. When her name was called, a hush fell over the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she ascended the stage, her veil catching the light. Standing at the podium, Isabella took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edges of the lectern. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I stand before you today not just as a graduate, but as someone who has carried a burden, a secret that has shaped my entire life." She paused, scanning the crowd. Faces filled with curiosity, skepticism, and even awe stared back at her. "I was born with a curse," she continued, her voice unwavering. "A curse that has taken lives and forced me into isolation. For years, I hid behind this veil, terrified of what my beauty could do to others. But today, I refuse to hide any longer." With a single deliberate motion, Isabella reached up and removed her veil. Gasps echoed through the hall as her face was revealed radiant, breathtaking, and utterly surreal. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of her beauty pressing down on everyone present. But then, something remarkable happened. No one collapsed, no one screamed. The curse, it seemed, had been broken. The realization washed over Isabella like a wave, her heart racing as she scanned the crowd. Eyes filled with awe and admiration met hers, but there was no fear, no panic. Tears blurred her vision as the weight she had carried for so long lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom she had never known. The hall erupted into applause, the sound deafening as the audience rose to their feet. Isabella's speech, though unfinished, no longer seemed necessary. Her act of courage had spoken louder than any words ever could. After the ceremony, students and faculty approached her, their words a mix of admiration and apology. "I never understood," one classmate confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry for how we treated you." Others echoed the sentiment, their expressions filled with remorse and respect. Alexander found her amidst the crowd, his smile wide and genuine. "I told you," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You're stronger than you think." As the sun set over the campus, Isabella stood on the steps of the main hall, her heart full. She wasn't just free from the curse. She was free from the fear and isolation that had defined her life. For the first time, she could see a future filled with possibilities. A future where her beauty was not a weapon, but a gift. One she could use to inspire and uplift others. Isabella's story spread far beyond the university, becoming a symbol of resilience and self-acceptance. She used her newfound freedom to advocate for causes close to her heart, championing diversity and challenging societal norms about beauty and identity. Serenity Hollow, once a place of whispers and fear, became a beacon of hope, its name synonymous with courage and transformation. And as Isabella looked toward the horizon, she knew her journey was far from over. The scars of her past would always remain, but they were no longer a source of pain. They were a testament to her strength, a reminder of the battle she had fought and won. In breaking the chains of her curse, Isabella had not only reclaimed her life, but also discovered the power of love, not just from others, but within herself. The weeks following Isabella's graduation marked a period of profound transformation, not just for her, but for everyone who had been part of her journey. Her decision to reveal her face during the ceremony had sparked a wave of conversations, both within the university and far beyond its walls. Articles appeared in local newspapers and academic journals, chronicling the story of the girl who had lived in the shadows only to step into the light. Her courage resonated with people across the world, turning her into an unlikely symbol of resilience and self-acceptance. Isabella, however, remained grounded amidst the growing attention. Fame was never her goal. Her only desire had been to live a life unburdened by fear. Now that the curse was broken, she felt an overwhelming sense of freedom, a lightness she had never known. And yet, there was a part of her that couldn't forget the pain and loss that had brought her to this moment. Nicholas's memory lingered like a bittersweet echo, reminding her of the price she had paid to reach this new chapter. Alexander, ever her steadfast ally, became an integral part of her new life. Together, they returned to Serenity Hollow, where Isabella's story had begun. The village, once cloaked in suspicion and fear, greeted her with open arms. It was as if her act of courage had not only freed her, but also released the community from the weight of their own prejudice. "You've given us hope," one elderly woman told her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your strength has shown us that we can overcome our own fears." Inspired by the outpouring of support, Isabella decided to turn Serenity Hollow into a sanctuary, a place where people from all walks of life could come to find healing and acceptance. She envisioned a community that celebrated diversity and resilience, where the scars of the past were not hidden but embraced as symbols of survival. With Alexander's help, she began transforming this small village into a haven for those seeking a fresh start. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Isabella threw herself into every aspect of the project, from designing programs for emotional and mental health to organizing workshops that encouraged creativity and self-expression. She drew on her own experiences, using her story to connect with others and inspire them to face their fears. Her intelligence, once confined to the pages of books, now found a new purpose in building something tangible and meaningful. The sanctuary quickly gained attention, drawing visitors and volunteers from across the country. Among them were former classmates from West Haven University, many of whom sought to make amends for the way they had treated Isabella. "I didn't understand what you were going through," one of them admitted during a volunteer meeting. "But seeing what you've built here makes me want to be better, to do better." As the sanctuary grew, so did Isabella's confidence. She began speaking at conferences and events, sharing her journey with audiences who hung on her every word. Her speeches were raw and honest, filled with the pain of her past but also the hope of her present. "We all carry scars," she told one crowd, her voice steady and clear. "Some are visible, others are not. But it's not our scars that define us, it's how we choose to live with them." Despite the demands of her new life, Isabella never lost sight of the personal connections that had sustained her through her darkest moments. Her bond with Alexander deepened, their shared mission strengthening the trust and understanding between them. While neither of them spoke openly about their feelings, there was an unspoken intimacy in their partnership, a sense of belonging that needed no words. One evening, as they stood together on the edge of Serenity Hollow, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, Alexander broke the silence. "You've changed everything," he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "Not just for the people here, for me too. I don't know who I'd be if I hadn't met you." Isabella turned to him, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "You gave me the strength to believe in myself," she replied. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their shared journey hung between them. It was a quiet, profound moment of understanding, one that spoke of love not as a sudden spark, but as a steady flame, built over time and tested by adversity. As the sanctuary entered its second year, Isabella found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The girl who had once been defined by a curse was now a woman defined by her courage and compassion. Her life was no longer dictated by fear, but by the choices she made each day to uplift and inspire others. The story of Serenity Hollow became a beacon for those seeking a second chance, its name synonymous with resilience and transformation. Isabella's journey, once shrouded in pain and isolation, had become a testament to the power of love for oneself, love for others, and love that could defy even the darkest of fates. And as the sun rose on a new day, casting its golden light over the sanctuary, Isabella stood at the heart of it all, her face unhidden, her heart unguarded, ready to face whatever came next. Her story was far from over, but she knew one thing with certainty: she was finally free. As we close this incredible journey, I hope Isabella's story has touched your heart as much as it has inspired countless others. Her resilience, her courage, and her ability to transform pain into purpose remind us that no matter how dark life may seem, there's always a way forward. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of love, acceptance, and the strength we carry within, then join us on this journey of inspiration. Hit that subscribe button and become a part of this growing community, where stories like Isabella's remind us of the beauty and strength in humanity. Let's continue to explore tales that challenge, uplift, and connect us to what truly matters. And before you go, don't forget to check out some of our other video stories filled with hope, lessons, and transformative journeys that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite lesson from Isabella's story, or affirming your own journey toward courage and love. Perhaps something like, "I embrace my strength and open my heart to love and acceptance." Let's fill this space with positivity and create a ripple effect of inspiration. Thank you for watching, for supporting, and for being part of a community that values the power of storytelling. Until next time, stay inspired and keep believing in the transformative power of love.